The cameras were gone, the fences broken, and the prize animals that once made Victoria Sterling a household name left to die in silence. At the far edge of her crumbling empire stood Atlas the Highland bull, the bison-sized beast with a crown of russet curls once worth a fortune. He'd graced magazine covers, starred in viral reels. Now he stood alone beside an empty trough, waiting for water that would never come. No one cared. Not the press, not the fans, not even the government agents tearing the ranch apart for evidence. But someone was watching, someone who hadn't forgotten what real worth looked like. The world thought Atlas was finished, but this wasn't the end for the bison-like giant. It was the moment he'd be seen for what he truly was, not a status symbol, but a survivor. And his reckoning was just beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog hung heavy over what used to be Sterling Ranch when Maya Chun first heard about the scandal on NPR. She was driving Highway 101 through Sonoma County, chasing the golden hour light that made drought-scorched hills look almost beautiful through her telephoto lens. The radio crackled with breaking news about celebrity rancher Victoria Sterling's sudden flight to Costa Rica, leaving behind a $50 million bankruptcy, federal tax evasion charges, and what the reporter called numerous exotic animals in uncertain condition. Maya pulled over at the next exit, her photographer's instincts already calculating angles and story possibilities. This wasn't just another tech mogul's downfall. This was environmental collapse meeting social media narcissism, with innocent animals caught in the wreckage. 3 days had passed since Sterling's empire crumbled, and the media circus was already moving on to fresher scandals. But Maya understood that the real story was just beginning in those drought-stricken hills, where creatures who'd never asked to be status symbols were facing abandonment that could kill them. 6 miles from Sterling Ranch, in a ravine that offered both water access and concealment, Ranger lifted his scarred muzzle to test the wind. The German Shepherd mix had survived 6 months in these hills, since escaping the puppy mill raid that should have been his salvation. Instead, it had been another betrayal, humans with kind voices and cruel cages, promising safety but delivering separation from the smaller dogs he'd fought to protect. His ribs showed through his matted coat, testament to the harsh mathematics of survival. Every calorie mattered when you weighed 65 pounds and winter was coming. But today, something was different. The wind carried sounds that made his hackles rise. Helicopters, shouting voices, the mechanical growl of heavy vehicles descending on territory he'd claimed as his own. In the farthest pasture, visible only as a dark speck against the golden hillside, Atlas stood alone. The Highland bull had been the crown jewel of Victoria Sterling's collection, worth more than most people's houses, and featured prominently in every episode of her reality show, Sterling Ranch. Born in the Scottish Highlands and imported at tremendous expense, Atlas represented everything Sterling wanted her brand to embody. Authentic, prestigious, Instagram-perfect. Now he stood motionless beside an empty water trough, his magnificent russet coat dulled by 3 days without proper care. The 2,200-pound champion who'd once posed for magazine covers was learning what abandonment felt like when the cameras stopped rolling. Elena Vasquez received the call at 2:47 a.m. on day 3. Animal control rarely got good news in the middle of the night, and this was no exception. The caller, who identified himself as a former ranch hand, was crying as he described what he'd seen during an unauthorized visit to check on animals Sterling had left behind. "The bull," the man said, his voice breaking. "Atlas is still in the back pasture. The water's been off for days, and there's no feed. Jesus, Elena, he's just standing there like he's waiting for someone to come back." Elena sat up in bed, already reaching for her uniform. She'd been dreading this call since news of Sterling's flight broke. 3 years of responding to abandoned animal cases had taught her the brutal arithmetic of neglect. Even the most valuable animals became worthless. When their owners disappeared, as Alina dressed in the dark, her 6-year-old daughter Sophia stirred in the next room. Single motherhood meant that animal emergencies often became family emergencies. But her babysitter was reliable and understood that sometimes Alina had to leave at odd hours to save lives. The media attention was already fading by the time Alina arrived at Sterling Ranch. The news vans had moved on to fresher scandals, leaving only crime scene tape and the detritus of a fallen empire. She badged her way past the FBI agent stationed at the gate, her animal control credentials opening doors that money and influence couldn't. Through her binoculars, she could see Atlas exactly as the ranch hand had described, standing motionless beside the empty water trough, his head lowered in what looked like resignation. Even from a distance, Alina could tell the bull was in distress. His normally proud posture had collapsed into something that spoke of dehydration and despair. As Alina prepared for what would certainly be a difficult rescue, she didn't notice the movement in the hills above the ranch. Ranger had crept close, enough to see the humans gathering around the suffering bull, his survival instincts warring with something deeper, a recognition that resonated in places scarred by his own abandonment. The scarred dog had never seen anything like Atlas before. The bull's size should have been intimidating, but there was something in the massive animal's stillness that spoke a language Ranger understood perfectly, the hollow exhaustion of being left behind. For 6 months, Ranger had lived by one rule: trust no one, depend on nothing except your own ability to survive. But rules, he was learning, sometimes had to break when something bigger than survival was at stake. As the sun climbed higher and Alina's backup arrived, Atlas swayed slightly on his feet. The movement was subtle, barely visible even through binoculars, but Ranger's predator-honed eyes caught it immediately. The bull was failing, and the humans below were still organizing their response. Ranger took one last look at the humans below, then began picking his way down the hillside toward the suffering bull. The most unlikely friendship in Sonoma County was about to begin in the shadow of abandonment. First contact: Maya. Chun arrived at Sterling Ranch's main gate just as the morning fog began its reluctant retreat into the Pacific. Her Subaru Outback, loaded with photography equipment worth more than the car itself, pulled into what had once been visitor parking for Sterling's reality show tourists. Now the lot was empty except for a single animal control vehicle and strips of yellow FBI tape that fluttered like prayer flags in the dry wind. She'd driven here straight from San Francisco after 3 days of watching the news, coverage focused exclusively on Sterling's financial crimes. Not one reporter had mentioned the animals left behind, as if living beings could be written off as easily as bad debt. Maya understood this selective blindness. She'd seen it her whole career. Environmental stories only made headlines when they involved human tragedy. Animal suffering was just a footnote, but Maya's telephoto lens had a way of making footnotes into front-page stories. The main ranch buildings told a story. Maya's camera captured in brutal detail feed trucks sitting abandoned with their loads, spoiling in the heat, automatic watering systems powered down, specialized climate control equipment dark and silent. Sterling's reality show had portrayed this as an agricultural paradise. Maya's lens revealed it as what it had always been, an expensive stage set with living props. She was adjusting her telephoto lens when she first saw Atlas. Even from half a mile away, the Highland bull was unmistakable. His massive frame dominated the far pasture like a monument to abandonment. Through her viewfinder, she could see what the news crews had missed: a champion animal reduced to standing vigil beside an empty water trough. But it was the movement at the edge of her frame that made her pause. Something was approaching Atlas from the hillside, moving with the careful deliberation of a predator who'd learned that survival depended on assessing every threat. Maya adjusted her zoom, bringing the figure into sharp focus. A dog German shepherd mix by the look of him, though it was hard to tell through the matted coat and visible ribs. Scars marked his muzzle and shoulders, telling stories Maya's practiced eye could read like a veterinary report. This was an animal who'd learned to fight for his life. What made her heart stop was watching him approach Atlas, the dog she'd already started thinking of him as Ranger, though she couldn't explain why approached Atlas with the careful respect of someone approaching a cathedral. No threatening postures, no aggressive movements. Just a scarred survivor recognizing another soul in crisis. Atlas lifted his massive head as Ranger approached. Dark eyes that had once sparkled for magazine. Cameras now dulled by dehydration and despair. But instead of alarm, Maya saw something else in the bull's expression, recognition. Through her viewfinder, she watched Ranger circle Atlas once, twice, 3 times, each orbit bringing him closer, each movement deliberate and non-threatening. When Ranger finally stopped, he positioned himself between Atlas and the ranch buildings, where human voices could still be heard. The message was unmistakable. This bull was under his protection now, but protection wasn't enough, and Ranger seemed to understand that. Maya watched, spellbound, as the dog disappeared into the brush, only to return 20 minutes later with his mouth dripping. He approached the empty water trough and began working at something Maya couldn't quite see from her position. It took her a moment to understand what was happening. Ranger was trying to share the water he'd carried in his mouth from some distant source, a pathetically small amount that wouldn't meaningfully help a 2,200-pound animal. But the gesture spoke to something deeper than practical assistance. Maya's camera captured it all. The scarred dog making repeated trips to bring water drops to the dying bull. Atlas lowering his great head to acknowledge each offering, the 2 abandoned souls finding solace in shared recognition of abandonment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. "Tommy, Maya, you need to see this. Sterling Ranch story is going viral on TikTok. #abandoned animals. Kids are freaking out about some bull." She moved closer, using a telephoto lens to maintain distance while improving her shots. Atlas and Ranger had settled into a rhythm that spoke of immediate and complete trust. The dog had positioned himself as a sentinel, alert to every sound and movement. While Atlas seemed to draw strength from his protector's presence, Maya captured the moment when Atlas managed to lower himself to the ground, his massive frame settling with the careful deliberation of someone conserving every ounce of remaining energy. Ranger immediately moved closer, pressing his scarred body against the bull's side, offering warmth, comfort, and the promise that he wouldn't die alone. Through her viewfinder, Maya watched tears blur her vision. She'd photographed countless animal stories, but this was different. This wasn't just documentation. This was witnessing the birth of something that would challenge everything people thought they knew about interspecies relationships. Her phone rang. "Tommy again. Maya, where are you? This Sterling Ranch thing is exploding online." "I'm here," Maya said quietly, never taking her eye from the viewfinder. "I'm at the ranch." Maya watched Ranger stand up, test the air, then move toward the fence line where she was positioned. For a moment, dog and photographer regarded each other across the drought-scorched grass. Ranger's amber eyes held intelligence that made Maya feel like she was being evaluated as much as she was observing. "Yeah," she said into the phone. "I'm getting photos, but Tommy, this isn't about my career anymore." Ranger seemed to make some internal decision. Instead of retreating, he began walking toward Maya's position, stopping just out of arm's reach. His message was clear. He was willing to trust her, but only if she proved worthy of that trust. Maya lowered her camera and knelt down, making herself smaller and less threatening. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said softly, knowing the dog couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would communicate what language couldn't. Ranger studied her for a long moment, then did something that made Maya's heart skip. Turned and looked back at Atlas, then returned his gaze to her. The meaning, telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. James Rivera's phone rang at 11:47 a.m. while he was elbow-deep in a difficult calving at the Morrison Dairy Farm. He almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed Maya Chun, a name he recognized from the wildlife photography community. Dr. Rivera, this is Maya Chun. I'm a photographer, and I'm at Sterling Ranch right now. There's a Highland bull here in critical condition, and he's being protected by a stray dog. They need immediate help. Rivera pulled his arm free from the Holstein cow, signaling his assistant to take over. Maya, I know about Atlas. I've been trying to reach someone about Sterling's animal since she fled. How bad is he? Bad. Maya's voice carried the weight of what she was witnessing through her telephoto lens. He's been without water for at least 3 days, maybe longer. But Dr. Rivera, there's something else. This dog, he's appointed himself as Atlas's guardian. They have some kind of bond I've never seen before. Rivera was already moving toward his truck, his mind calculating logistics. Maya, I need you to call Alana Vasquez at Animal Control. Tell her I'm on my way and that we're going to need emergency access. And whatever you do, don't approach Atlas directly. Highland bulls can be unpredictable when they're stressed. The dog won't let me approach anyway, Maya said. He set up a perimeter around Atlas. Dr. Rivera, I think this dog has been keeping Atlas alive somehow. 20 minutes later, Rivera's veterinary truck pulled through Sterling Ranch's gates. Behind Elena Vasquez's animal control vehicle. Elena emerged from her truck with the grim expression Rivera had learned to associate with bad cases, but it was Maya Chun who caught his attention. The photographer was positioned about 50 yards. From the pasture fence, her massive telephoto lens trained on something Rivera couldn't yet see clearly. She lowered her camera as they approached, and Rivera noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Rivera raised his binoculars and immediately understood why Maya's hands were shaking. Atlas stood in the center of the pasture, his magnificent Highland coat dulled by dehydration and neglect. Even from a distance, Rivera could see the bull's labored breathing and the way he favored his left foreleg, classic signs of severe dehydration in large animals. But it was the dog that made Rivera pause. In his assessment, a German Shepherd mix, clearly feral and bearing the scars of hard living, had positioned himself between Atlas and the fence line. The dog's body language screamed hypervigilance, but his proximity to the massive bull was extraordinary. How long have they been together? Rivera asked. I've been watching for 2 hours, Maya said. The dog approached Atlas on his own, and they immediately bonded. He's been bringing Atlas water in his mouth from somewhere, not enough to help, but the gesture ... Elena joined them at the fence, her expression troubled. Dr. Rivera, we have a problem. My supervisor wants me to separate them immediately. Protocol requires that feral animals be quarantined separately from livestock. Rivera lowered his binoculars. Elena, that bull is dying. If we stress him further by separating him from what appears to be his only source of comfort, we could trigger cardiac arrest. A new voice cut through their discussion. What the hell is going on here? They turned to see Elena's supervisor, District Chief Marcus Webb, emerging from an animal control SUV with the kind of officiously energy that Rivera had learned to dread. Webb was a by-the-book administrator who'd never met a protocol he wouldn't enforce, regardless of circumstances. Elena, why haven't you secured that feral dog? It's posing a clear threat to valuable livestock. Maya's camera captured the moment when Webb's words reached Ranger. The dog's ears pricked forward, and he moved closer to Atlas, his body language shifting to aggressive protection. Atlas, despite his weakened state, lowered his massive head toward his guardian, a gesture that spoke of complete trust. Sir, Elena said carefully, the situation is more complex than it appears. The dog isn't threatening the bull. He's actually providing comfort and protection. Webb pulled out his own binoculars, studying the pair with the calculating expression of someone assessing problems rather than beings. I see a feral animal that needs to be quarantined, and a valuable piece of livestock that needs immediate medical attention. Dr. Rivera, how quickly can you sedate that bull for transport? Rivera felt his jaw tighten. Chief Webb, Atlas is severely dehydrated and stressed. Moving him right now without proper stabilization could kill him. And separating him from the dog will only increase his stress levels. The dog is not part of this equation, Webb said firmly. Elena, I want that animal secured immediately. Webb's radio crackled with static. Animal Control 7, this is dispatch. We've got reports of media crews heading your way. Ada 15 minutes. The last thing Webb wanted was news cameras capturing animal control officers forcibly separating a dying bull from his canine protector. The optics would be disastrous, especially with Sterling's animal welfare record already under scrutiny. Fine, Webb said reluctantly. Dr. Rivera, you have 1 hour to stabilize that bull on site. But if that dog shows any aggression toward my officers or the medical team, we separate them immediately. Rivera was already moving toward the fence with his medical kit. Maya, I need you to keep documenting this. If we're going to try something this unprecedented, we need a complete record. As Rivera approached the fence, Ranger's body language shifted again. The dog studied the veterinarian with intelligent amber eyes, clearly assessing threat levels. Rivera stopped just outside the fence and did something that surprised everyone. He sat down in the dirt and waited. For several long minutes, man and dog regarded each other across the chain-link barrier. Rivera spoke in the soft, reassuring tones he used with frightened animals, explaining what he needed to do to help Atlas. Ranger couldn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the intention. Finally, incredibly, Ranger moved aside, just enough to allow Rivera access to the gate while maintaining his protective position near Atlas. I've never seen anything like this, Elena whispered to Maya as Rivera entered the pasture. It's like they're communicating. Maya raised her camera, capturing the moment when Dr. Rivera knelt beside Atlas while Ranger watched every movement. With laser focus, the dog had given permission for this human intervention, but his vigilance made it clear that permission could be revoked at any sign of threat. As Rivera inserted an N4 line into Atlas's neck, Ranger moved closer to the bull's head, positioning himself where Atlas could see him. The massive animal's breathing seemed to steady with his protector in sight, and for the first time in days, there was hope in those dark bovine eyes. Maya captured it all. The veterinarian working to save a life, the dog standing guard over his friend, and the bull drawing strength from the most unlikely source imaginable. All she knew was that she was witnessing something that proved love could emerge from the darkest places, and that sometimes the most broken souls were exactly the ones capable of saving each other. The bond deepens. Dr. Rivera's rural veterinary clinic sat on 20 acres of rolling hills 15 miles from Sterling Ranch. Its weathered barn and modest facilities, a stark contrast to the high-tech luxury Atlas had known in his previous life. But as the massive Highland bull was carefully unloaded from the specialized transport trailer, it was clear that luxury had never been what he truly needed. Ranger rode in the cab of Rivera's truck, his amber eyes never leaving the trailer carrying Atlas. The decision to transport them together had been Elena's a bureaucratic risk that could have cost her job, but one she'd made after watching the dog's distress when they'd attempted even a brief separation at Sterling Ranch. Now, 3 hours later, Atlas stood in Rivera's largest recovery stall while Ranger positioned himself at the optimal observation point, close enough to provide comfort, far enough to avoid interfering with medical care. The dog had somehow intuited the boundaries of this new environment and established his own protocols for Atlas's protection. Maya documented every moment through her telephoto lens, her photography telling the story of trust being rebuilt one careful interaction at a time. Atlas's condition had stabilized during transport, but Rivera's examination revealed the full extent of Sterling's neglect: severe dehydration, malnutrition, and stress-related gastric ulcers that would require weeks of careful treatment. The physical damage is significant but manageable, Rivera explained to Maya as they watched Atlas cautiously explore his new surroundings. It's the psychological trauma that concerns me. Highland bulls are intelligent animals with complex, emotional lives. Atlas has been abandoned by every human he trusted. But as they spoke, something remarkable was happening in the recovery stall. Atlas had discovered the automatic water system, the first reliable source of clean water he'd had in days. As the bull drank deeply, Ranger approached the water trough and began his own careful assessment. Maya's camera captured the moment when Ranger, satisfied that the water was safe, performed the same ritual he'd attempted at Sterling Ranch, filling his mouth with water and approaching Atlas as if to share it. Atlas lowered his massive head, allowing Ranger to deposit the water droplets near his muzzle, a gesture that served no practical purpose but spoke to bonds that transcended species. Rivera followed her camera angle and witnessed something that challenged 30 years of veterinary training. Ranger was teaching Atlas to trust a new environment by demonstrating that the resources were safe. The dog, Rivera looked toward the recovery stall where Atlas was teaching Ranger to accept treats from human hands, a lesson in trust that was benefiting them both. Bring them here, if Atlas and Ranger can handle the company. Rocky arrived first, a 25-year-old quarter horse whose calm demeanor had seen him through multiple ranch closures and owner changes. Rivera expected integration challenges. Horses and bulls weren't natural companions, and adding Ranger to the equation seemed like a recipe for territorial disputes. Instead, he witnessed something that would later be featured in veterinary behavioral journals. Atlas sensed Rocky's approach before the horse was even unloaded from the trailer. The bull moved to the front of his stall, and when Rocky was led into the adjacent enclosure, Atlas performed what could only be described as a formal introduction. He approached the shared fence line, lowered his massive head, and waited. Rocky, wise from decades of reading animal behavior, approached cautiously. The two large animals touched noses through the fence, a greeting that established mutual respect, without challenging either's dignity. But it was Ranger's reaction that truly surprised Rivera. Instead of becoming protective or territorial, the dog positioned himself between the two large animals, as if he was facilitating their introduction. When Rocky showed signs of stress pawing the ground, rolling his eyes, Ranger would move closer to the fence, his calming presence somehow communicating that this was a safe space. Luna's arrival the following day presented different challenges. The pregnant goat was skittish, fearful, and clearly traumatized by her abandonment. Rivera had expected Atlas and Ranger to maintain their distance. Male animals often avoided pregnant females to prevent territorial complications. Instead, both Atlas and Ranger seemed to understand that Luna needed special protection. Maya watched through her viewfinder as Atlas positioned himself to create a shelter area where Luna could feel secure. The massive bull became a living windbreak, using his body to create a calm microenvironment where the anxious goat could rest. Ranger, meanwhile, appointed himself as Luna's personal security detail, maintaining a protective perimeter that allowed her to graze and explore without fear. But perhaps the most remarkable development was Atlas's growing confidence around humans. With Ranger as his emotional support and Rocky as his wise counselor, Atlas began to show interest in the people who provided his care. Rivera noticed that the bull would approach the fence when Maya arrived with her camera, as if he understood that she was documenting their story for the outside world. Maya's photographs from this period captured the emergence of what researchers would later term therapeutic community behavior. Atlas wasn't just recovering from physical trauma. He was developing leadership skills that would serve him well in his eventual role as a sanctuary founder. Ranger wasn't just protecting Atlas, he was learning to extend his care to other vulnerable animals. Dr. Rivera, Maya said on their 5th evening of documenting the group dynamics, "I think we're witnessing something that's going to change animal therapy forever." Rivera nodded, watching as Ranger performed his evening security rounds, while Atlas maintained watch over Luna's resting spot. "Maya, I think you're right. And I think the world needs to see what you're documenting." As stars appeared over Rivera's clinic, 4 abandoned animals settled into sleep patterns that spoke of security none of them had known before their rescue. Maya captured one final photograph. Atlas and Ranger touching noses in what had become their goodnight ritual, with Rocky and Luna resting peacefully nearby. The image would later become the cover of Maya's photography book, but tonight it was simply evidence of something extraordinary, proof that the most broken souls often have the greatest capacity for healing, not just themselves, but anyone lucky enough to witness their journey back to trust. Going viral to legal victory. Tommy Chun's thumb hovered over the post button on his phone screen at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Atlas and Ranger's rescue. His sister Maya had finally given him permission to share the story publicly, and Tommy had spent hours crafting what he believed would be the perfect TikTok debut for the unlikely friendship. The video was deceptively simple: 30 seconds of Maya's most powerful photographs set to trending audio, with text overlays telling the story in bite-sized format. POV: a stray dog saves a dying bull abandoned by a millionaire. Influencer appeared over the image of Ranger's first approach to Atlas. Plot twist: they become best friends and create their own healing sanctuary, played over shots of the 4 animals at Rivera's clinic. Tommy hit post and went to bed. He woke up to 2.3 million views and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. By noon, Rivera's clinic was under siege. Maya counted 12 news vans parked along a rural road that had never seen traffic heavier than the occasional feed truck. Reporters with perfectly styled hair and expensive cameras were setting up shots with the clinic's modest facilities as their backdrop, while social media influencers live-streamed their attempts to get closer to the famous friendship everyone's talking about. Through Rivera's office window, they could see Atlas in his enclosure, clearly agitated by the noise and crowds. The bull was pacing a stress behavior he hadn't displayed since his first days at the clinic. Ranger had positioned himself in full protection mode, hackles raised, refusing to let anyone approach the fence line. But not all the attention was exploitative. Dr. Sarah Martinez from UC Davis's School of Veterinary Medicine called personally to offer research collaboration. The American Humane Society sent an official letter of support and a substantial donation for Atlas's continued care. However, it was the arrival of Victoria Sterling's legal team that transformed viral fame into existential threat. The process server arrived at 3:47 p.m., threading through the media circus with legal documents that made Maya's blood run cold. Sterling's lawyers were demanding immediate return of Atlas, claiming that his viral fame constituted unlawful exploitation of their client's property. The timing wasn't coincidental. Sterling's legal team had clearly been monitoring social media, waiting for Atlas to become valuable again before asserting ownership rights. His viral fame had made him a commodity worth fighting for the exact outcome Maya had feared when Tommy first posted their story. But viral fame had also created unexpected allies. Tommy's strategic social media campaign had attracted attention from animal rights lawyers, behavioral researchers, and advocacy organizations with resources Sterling's team couldn't match. Within hours, Tommy had assembled a video compilation showing the stark contrast between Sterling's neglect and the care Atlas had received at Rivera's clinic. Maya's photographs told the story Sterling's words couldn't erase. A dying animal saved by the love of a stray dog and the dedication of people who saw him as more than property. The legal battle. Sonoma County Courthouse had never seen anything like the crowd that gathered on October 15th for what local media had dubbed the Atlas hearing. Animal rights activists filled the steps, holding signs with Maya's photographs of Atlas and Ranger's friendship. The circus atmosphere would have been comical if the stakes weren't so devastating. Maya sat in the front row behind the defendant's table, her camera bag searched twice by courthouse security. Beside her, Dr. Rivera reviewed his expert witness testimony while Elena fidgeted with the disciplinary paperwork that could cost her job. Regardless of the hearing's outcome, Victoria Sterling's legal team had spared no expense. Lead counsel Harrison Brooks commanded a corner table stacked with leather portfolios, his $2,000 suit, and Harvard Law credentials projecting the kind of institutional power that typically crushed small-town animal advocates. "Your Honor, Brooks," began, his voice carrying practiced authority, "this case is fundamentally about property rights under California law. My client, Miss Sterling, owns a registered Highland bull valued at $200,000. Regardless of the criminal charges she faces, which she strenuously denies, her ownership of this animal remains legally valid." Judge Patricia Hernandez, a 20-year veteran of Sonoma County's legal system, had reviewed the case files with growing fascination. She'd presided over countless animal custody disputes, but never one where the central question was whether emotional bonds between animals could supersede property law. Maya's lawyer, Janet Rodriguez from the SPCA's legal team, rose with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we're not just dealing with property law here. We're dealing with a documented case of interspecies bonding that has therapeutic value for both animals involved." Rodriguez moved to a laptop connected to the courtroom's display system. Maya's photographs filled the large screen images that told the story of Atlas and Ranger's relationship with scientific precision and emotional power. Dr. Rivera took the stand with 30 years of veterinary experience backing his every word. "Your Honor, I've documented behavioral patterns between Atlas and Ranger that challenge conventional understanding of interspecies relationships," Rivera testified. "The dog performs what can only be described as therapeutic care for the bull, monitoring his stress levels, providing comfort during medical procedures, even facilitating his interactions with other animals." Brooks rose for cross-examination like a shark sensing blood. "Dr. Rivera, isn't it true that you've never published peer-reviewed research on so-called therapeutic interspecies bonding?" "That's correct. And isn't it also true that your clinic's financial situation has improved dramatically since this case became viral news?" Rivera's response was measured but firm. "Mr. Brooks, I've been treating large animals for 3 decades. I've never seen anything like the relationship between Atlas and Ranger, and I've never seen recovery rates improve as dramatically as they have with these animals supporting each other." The hearing's turning point came when Elena took the stand. "Your Honor," Elena testified, "I violated department protocol because separating Atlas and Ranger would have been cruel. I've seen what happens when traumatized animals lose their support systems. I couldn't be part of inflicting that kind of damage." But the hearing's most dramatic moment came via video link from Costa Rica. Victoria Sterling appeared on the courtroom's main screen, her image beamed in from what appeared to be a luxury resort's conference room. "Your Honor," Sterling said, her practiced vulnerability on full display, "Atlas was like family to me. I never intended for him to suffer. The federal investigation forced me to leave everything behind, but I always planned to return for my animals." Rodriguez's cross-examination of Sterling was surgical. "Miss Sterling, yes or no? Did you arrange food, water, or medical care for Atlas during your absence?" "No, but thank you." No further questions. Judge Hernandez called a recess to review the evidence. When court reconvened, her decision would reshape animal welfare law across California. The court finds that the documented therapeutic relationship between Atlas and Ranger constitutes a compelling welfare interest that supersedes traditional property claims. Custody of both animals is awarded to the Healing Pastures Trust, a newly established nonprofit dedicated to cross-species therapeutic care. Maya felt her knees buckle with relief. The ruling did more than protect Atlas and Ranger. It established the legal framework for what Maya had been documenting photographically. Animal relationships could be recognized as having therapeutic value that transcended monetary worth. Building the sanctuary 6 weeks later, Maya stood on what had once been Victoria Sterling's front porch, surveying the transformation of Sterling Ranch into something Sterling had never imagined, a genuine sanctuary built around healing rather than image. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Sterling's bankruptcy proceedings had put the ranch property up for auction, and the viral fame of Atlas and Ranger's story had generated enough donations to make the Healing Pastures Trust the winning bidder. Atlas was returning to the place where he'd nearly died, but now as the foundation of something unprecedented. Dr. Rivera had worked with animal behavioral specialists from UC Davis to design what they called therapeutic integration spaces, environments, where animals recovering from various traumas could interact naturally while receiving specialized care. The centerpiece was Atlas and Ranger's expanded enclosure, large enough to accommodate their leadership role in helping other animals adapt to sanctuary life. Dr. Rivera, Maya said, watching construction crews install specialized fencing designed to allow visual contact between different species while maintaining safety protocols. Are you sure this is going to work? Building a sanctuary around two specific animals? Rivera looked toward the pasture where Atlas and Ranger were overseeing the arrival of their first new residents, 3 horses rescued from another celebrity abandonment case in Malibu. Atlas approached the fence line with the confidence of someone who'd learned his own worth, while Ranger performed his familiar assessment routine, determining whether these newcomers would integrate peacefully into their therapeutic community. Maya, watch them work, Rivera said. Atlas isn't just recovering anymore, he's become a healer. And Ranger has learned to extend his protective instincts to any animal that needs them. They're not just residents here, they're the therapy team. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Atlas, once broken by abandonment, now served as a calming presence for newly arrived animals. His size could have been intimidating, but traumatized animals seemed to recognize something in his demeanor that spoke of shared experience and recovery. He would position himself near frightened newcomers, his steady breathing and calm energy, providing the kind of therapeutic presence that human caregivers struggled to replicate. Ranger had evolved from Atlas's protector into the sanctuary's unofficial coordinator. He would assess each new arrival, determine their stress levels, and somehow communicate to Atlas how much space and time they needed before integration attempts. The dog had developed an uncanny ability to read animal trauma, perhaps because his own hypervigilance had taught him to recognize fear in all its manifestations. But the sanctuary's most revolutionary aspect was its human therapy program. Dr. Rivera had partnered with local hospitals and therapy centers to offer animal-assisted treatment for trauma survivors. Children who'd experienced abuse, veterans dealing with PTSD, families recovering from loss, all found healing through interactions with animals who understood suffering from the inside. Maya, you have to see this, Elena said, approaching from the main therapy building where a group session was concluding. We just had a breakthrough with Marcus, that 8-year-old from the foster care system who hasn't spoken since his placement. Maya followed Elena to observe what had become a daily miracle at Healing Pastures. Marcus, who'd been selectively mute for 3 months following family trauma, was sitting beside Atlas's enclosure, speaking in whispers to the massive bull. Atlas had lowered his head to fence level, allowing the boy to touch his muzzle while Ranger maintained a respectful distance that somehow communicated that this space was safe for vulnerability. He's been talking to Atlas for 20 minutes. Elena whispered. His therapist says it's the first time he's spoken voluntarily since his rescue. Maya raised her camera, capturing the moment when healing met healing, a traumatized child finding his voice through connection with animals who'd survived their own abandonment. Dr. Rivera, Maya said as they watched Marcus continue his quiet conversation with Atlas. I think we've built something bigger than a sanctuary. I think we've built a new model for therapeutic community. Rivera nodded, watching Ranger perform his evening security rounds, while Atlas maintained his gentle presence with the therapy participants. Maya, I think Atlas and Ranger have taught us something profound about healing. It's not something you achieve, it's something you practice by helping others find their way back to trust. As sunset painted the Sonoma Hills gold, Maya captured one final image of the day. Atlas and Ranger in their familiar evening position, but now surrounded by a community of animals and humans who'd found healing through their example. The sanctuary wasn't just housing rescued animals. It was proving that the most broken souls often possess the greatest capacity for creating healing spaces for others. Victoria's return and recognition, the black Tesla pulled through the gates of what had once been her empire at exactly 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, 8 months after Atlas and Ranger's rescue. Victoria Sterling stepped out onto asphalt that no longer belonged to her, her designer heels clicking against pavement that now served animals she'd once treated as props. Maya watched from the observation deck of the sanctuary's main building, her camera already documenting what would become one of the most viewed confrontations in animal advocacy history. Sterling had returned from Costa Rica to face federal sentencing, but her legal team had negotiated this media opportunity. A carefully orchestrated redemption tour, designed to rehabilitate her image before Judgment Day. She's early, Elena muttered, checking her watch against the agreed-upon schedule. The convoy following her Tesla included her publicist, a camera crew from a network morning show, and lawyers whose billable hours could fund a small sanctuary. For a year, Maya adjusted her telephoto lens, focusing on the far pasture where Atlas stood with the calm authority of someone who'd transformed suffering into leadership. Atlas has been restless since dawn. I think he senses something. The massive Highland bull had abandoned his usual morning routine of greeting therapy visitors and supervising new animal arrivals. Instead, he'd positioned himself at the highest point of his enclosure, dark eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity Maya had learned to associate with his hyper-vigilant early days. Sterling emerged from her Tesla like she was walking a red carpet, her transformation from Instagram rancher to courtroom defendant complete but not entirely convincing. Her tailored charcoal suit screamed expensive legal defense, and her smile carried the artificial warmth of someone who'd built a career on performing authenticity. Miss Sterling, Elena stepped forward, her animal control uniform pressed and professional despite the personal history between them. You're early, and you were supposed to coordinate media access through our legal team. Elena, isn't it? I remember you from that unpleasant business last year. She gestured to the camera crew, unpacking equipment behind her. I hope you don't mind the documentation. I thought the world should see what's been accomplished here. After all, this was my vision from the beginning, a place where animals could heal and thrive. Maya felt her finger tighten on the camera's shutter release. Through her telephoto lens, she captured the exact moment when Sterling's carefully rehearsed vulnerability revealed something ugly underneath, a flash of proprietary entitlement. That suggested she still believed she owned everything she surveyed. Your vision? Dr. Rivera's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd spent countless nights keeping Atlas alive. Your vision was abandoning a critically ill animal to die alone in a drought-stricken pasture. That's a very hurtful characterization of what was an incredibly difficult business situation, Sterling said, her tone shifting to practiced vulnerability. I was devastated to leave Atlas and the other animals, But sometimes life forces impossible choices on us. Maya lowered her camera and stepped forward, her professional courtesy finally exhausted. Impossible choices like fleeing to Costa Rica while your animal starved? For a split second, Sterling's mask slipped entirely, revealing the narcissistic rage that lurked beneath her carefully constructed public persona. Maya understood why Atlas had been so agitated all morning. Animals possess senses humans had lost. They could smell emotional poison, even when it came wrapped in designer clothing and media-friendly sound bites. "I'd like to see Atlas now," Sterling announced with the entitlement of someone who'd never truly faced consequences for her actions. "After all, we have quite a bit of history together." Atlas stood in the center of his space, his massive frame silhouetted against the golden hills that had once nearly been his graveyard. At nearly 2,000 pounds of muscle and Highland breeding, he was an impressive sight even to visitors who'd grown accustomed to his presence. His long, russet coat gleamed with health, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that had surprised visiting researchers and therapy participants alike. Beside him, Ranger sat at perfect attention, his scarred muzzle lifted slightly as he tested the air for threats. The dog's transformation from feral survivor to sanctuary coordinator had been remarkable, but his protective instincts toward Atlas remained as sharp as the day Maya had first photographed their unlikely friendship. Sterling approached the fence with misplaced confidence. "Atlas," she called, her voice taking on the artificially sweet tone she'd used in her social media videos. "Look how magnificent you are. I always knew you were special." Atlas turned his great head toward the sound, and Maya held her breath. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the bull simply stared at his former owner, his expression unreadable. Then something shifted in his posture, a subtle tension that Maya recognized as distress from months of photographing his recovery. Ranger noticed immediately. The German Shepherd mix rose smoothly to his feet and positioned himself between Atlas and the fence, his body language shifting from alert to protective. A low rumble emerged from his chest, not quite a growl, but a clear warning. Sterling was already climbing onto the fence's lower rail, leaning over to get closer to the animals. "Atlas, remember me? Remember all those show ribbons we won together?" Instead of retreating, Sterling reached into her jacket and pulled out something that made Maya's blood run cold. A handful of premium hay cubes, the expensive treats she'd used to train Atlas for photo opportunities during her reality show days. "Look what I brought you," Sterling said, extending her hand through the fence. "Your favorites, just like old times." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Atlas let out a bellow of distress that echoed across the sanctuary, causing therapy. Animals throughout the facility to panic in their enclosures. But it was Ranger's response that truly shocked everyone present. The normally controlled dog launched himself at the fence with a ferocity Maya had never witnessed. His teeth bared as he tried to reach Sterling's outstretched hand. His claws scraped against the metal mesh with the desperation of someone trying to protect everything he'd fought to build. "Jesus Christ!" Elena shouted, pulling Sterling back from the fence as Ranger's protective fury reached its peak. Everyone back. Away from the fence now. As Sterling's convoy pulled away, kicking up dust clouds that settled over the sanctuary like a physical reminder of her intrusion, Maya approached Atlas's enclosure with careful steps. The bull had retreated to the far corner, his massive frame shaking with what could only be described as a panic attack. But slowly, as the sound of engines faded into the distance, Atlas began to relax. He turned to Ranger and made a soft whining sound, the same vocalization Maya had first witnessed. When Ranger was trying to comfort the dying bull, Atlas lifted his great head and looked toward his protector, then took a tentative step forward, then another, until he was close enough to lower his head and gently nuzzle Ranger's scarred shoulder. Maya captured it all. Atlas and Ranger choosing each other again in the face of their shared past trauma, their bond proving stronger than their fear. The letter arrived on federal government letterhead exactly 18 months after Atlas and Ranger's first meeting, its weight and significance immediately apparent to Maya as she opened. What would prove to be transformational news? The Department of Health and Human Services was awarding Healing Pastures Sanctuary a $2.3 million grant to establish the nation's first official cross-species therapeutic research center. Maya, read the contents 3 times before the magnitude sank in. Atlas and Ranger's story hadn't just captured hearts, it had changed policy at the highest levels of government. By the time Dr. Rivera arrived from his morning rounds with the therapy animals, Maya had the letters spread across the conference table alongside a stack of related documents that had been accumulating for months. Letters from senators, endorsements from veterinary colleges, research proposals from universities across the country, all stemming from the bond between a Highland bull and a German shepherd mix who'd learned to heal others by healing themselves. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Rivera said, his voice barely concealing his emotion as he read the grant details. "They're not just funding our current programs. They want us to develop a replicable model for therapeutic sanctuaries nationwide." Elena arrived wearing her work boots from a morning rescue call, now serving as head of animal welfare and safety for the sanctuary, after leaving animal control to join their revolutionary work. "Elena, they're calling it the Atlas Protocol. Federal recognition of cross-species therapeutic relationships as a legitimate medical intervention." The grant represented more than funding. It was validation of everything they'd built from the ashes of Victoria Sterling's abandonment. Dr. Rivera would lead research into animal-assisted therapy programs that could be replicated in hospitals, trauma centers, and rehabilitation facilities across the country. But perhaps most significantly, Atlas and Ranger would become the foundation for a new field of study: therapeutic animal leadership. Over 18 months, Atlas and Ranger had mentored 47 rescued animals through their integration into therapeutic work. Their success rate was unprecedented. Every animal they'd worked with had not only recovered from their own trauma, but had gone on to provide comfort and healing for human patients. Tommy's laptop displayed analytics that would have impressed social media executives. The Healing Pastures model is being replicated in 12 states. Our training videos have been viewed 14 million times. And Maya, your photography book, Healing Hearts, the Atlas and Ranger story, just hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The book, with proceeds funding sanctuary expansion, had become more than documentation. It was inspiring a movement. Readers weren't just buying the photographs. They were donating to animal sanctuaries, volunteering at therapy programs, and advocating for legislation protecting bonded animals from separation. Maya, the Atlas law just passed in California. Unanimous vote in both houses. The Atlas law, named after their Highland bull, prohibited the separation of documented bonded animals during custody disputes, bankruptcy proceedings, or estate settlements. It was the first legislation in American history to recognize animal relationships as legally protected bonds worthy of preservation. 12 other states are introducing similar legislation, Elena said, her voice filled with the satisfaction of someone who'd fought bureaucracy and won. Maya, Atlas and Ranger haven't just changed how we think about animal therapy, they've changed how the law treats animal relationships. As autumn settled over Sonoma County, international delegations began arriving at Healing Pastures to study what was being called the California model of therapeutic sanctuary design. Dr. Rivera found himself traveling to conferences worldwide, presenting research that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and empathy. The proof was overwhelming. Maya's documentation showed Atlas working with a combat veteran whose PTSD had resisted traditional treatment for 3 years. The massive bull's presence had a measurable calming effect on the veteran's heart rate and cortisol levels, while Ranger's protective positioning helped the man feel safe enough to process Traumatic memories. Maya had captured Atlas teaching a rescued racehorse named Thunder how to position himself near anxious children without overwhelming them. Ranger had shown a former fighting dog named Grace how to use protective positioning to help trauma survivors feel safe rather than threatened. They're creating a therapeutic culture, Elena observed, watching Grace work with a teenage girl who'd been struggling with self-harm behaviors. Animals who were once victims are becoming healers under Atlas and Ranger's guidance. The sanctuary now housed 63 animals, all of whom had been integrated into therapeutic work through Atlas and Ranger's mentorship. Their success had attracted funding from major foundations, partnerships with medical centers, and recognition from the United Nations as a model for human-animal therapeutic relationships. Maya, Tommy said, his voice carrying unusual seriousness as he reviewed their email. You're not going to believe this. The International Association of Animal Behavior Specialists wants to establish an annual award for therapeutic animal leadership. They want to call it the Atlas Ranger Prize. Maya looked toward the main pasture where Atlas was conducting what had become known as morning meditation with a group of therapy animals and their human partners. The massive bull would lower himself to the ground, his steady breathing creating a calm center that seemed to affect everyone in his vicinity. Ranger maintained his protective perimeter, ensuring that this sacred space remained safe for vulnerability and healing. Atlas and Ranger had evolved from abandoned animals to international symbols of therapeutic possibility. Their story had inspired legislation, revolutionized animal therapy, and proven that sometimes the most broken souls possess the greatest capacity for healing others. 2 years to the day after, Maya Shen first photographed a dying bull and a scarred dog finding each other in the ruins of Victoria Sterling's abandoned ranch. She stood at the same observation deck, watching something that would have seemed impossible during those desperate early days. Atlas and Ranger were welcoming their most challenging case yet. Group of 23 animals rescued from another celebrity. Abandonment in Nevada. The parallels were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. A tech influencer's sustainable living ranch had collapsed under federal investigation, leaving behind traumatized animals who'd been treated as content props rather than living beings. But unlike Atlas's original rescue, this time there was a proven protocol for healing, a sanctuary ready to receive them, and 2 extraordinary animals who'd transformed their own abandonment into a gift for helping others survive theirs. Maya, you need to see this, Dr. Rivera said, approaching from the main therapy building where a group session had just concluded. We just had a breakthrough with Sarah, that 7-year-old from the pediatric trauma program who hasn't spoken since her family's car accident. Maya moved closer, careful not to disturb the therapeutic space Atlas had created around the grieving child. Sarah's voice was barely audible, but her words carried the wisdom of someone far older than her 7 years. Atlas, I know you were sad before you came here, Sarah whispered, her small hand resting on the bull's massive nose. But you learned how to help other animals feel better. Maybe I can learn how to help other kids who feel sad like me. Maya felt tears blur her vision as she captured the moment when Atlas seemed to nod in response to Sarah's words. The massive bull's dark eyes held the same gentle intelligence she'd first photographed during his own darkest days. But now that intelligence was focused on giving rather than receiving comfort. The afternoon brought the arrival of the Nevada rescue animals, and Maya documented Atlas and Ranger's response with the reverence she'd learned these moments deserved. Among the new arrivals was a young Highland bull named Titan, barely 18 months old and so traumatized by abandonment that he wouldn't allow humans to approach. The parallels to Atlas's original condition were unmistakable, but now there was something that hadn't existed 2 years ago, a healed animal who could serve as mentor and guide. Maya watched through her telephoto lens as Atlas approached the fence separating him from Titan. The massive bull's movements were deliberate and non-threatening, communicating in the same gentle way he'd learned to approach human therapy patients. Atlas positioned himself where Titan could see him clearly, then simply waited. "He's showing Titan that this place is different," Maya observed, her camera capturing the moment when the young bull lifted his head to study his potential mentor. "He's demonstrating that healing is possible." Ranger's role in the integration was equally remarkable. The scarred German Shepherd mix approached Titan's enclosure and performed the same protective positioning he'd first established with Atlas, placing himself between the traumatized animal and any potential threats, communicating that this space was safe for vulnerability. Perhaps the most extraordinary development was watching Luna's twins, now yearlings themselves, begin to assist in the newcomer integration process. Born at the sanctuary, they'd learned therapeutic behavior from Atlas and Ranger, becoming the first generation of animals raised specifically for healing work. As evening approached, Maya prepared to capture what had become the sanctuary's most requested photograph: Atlas and Ranger's sunset ritual, now performed with an extended family of animals who'd learned to find peace through their example. Tommy approached with his laptop, displaying analytics that would have impressed major media corporations. "Maya, the new documentary about healing pastures premieres next month on National Geographic. And the book's international sales just passed 2 million copies." But the commercial success felt secondary to what Maya was witnessing through her viewfinder. Atlas had positioned himself in the center of the main pasture, his massive frame creating a calm focal point for the entire sanctuary community. Ranger maintained his protective perimeter, but now he was teaching younger animals how to share in the responsibility of keeping their community safe. The photograph Maya captured that evening would later become the final image in her second book. But in that moment, it was simply evidence of transformation completed. Atlas and Ranger surrounded by animals they'd mentored, children they'd helped heal, and adults who'd found hope through their example. Sarah, the selective mute childhood, found her voice through Atlas's patient presence, was among the therapy participants joining the evening gathering. She sat beside the fence, no longer silent, telling Atlas about her day and her plans to help other children who'd experienced loss. "Atlas," Sarah said, her voice clear and confident, "thank you for teaching me that sad things can turn into helping things." Maya lowered her camera, finally understanding the complete arc of the story she'd been documenting for 2 years. Atlas and Ranger's journey from abandonment to healing wasn't ending with their own recovery. It was beginning a legacy that would touch countless lives for generations to come. Dr. Rivera joined Maya at the fence, watching as Atlas performed his evening rounds, checking on each animal in the sanctuary community he'd helped build. "Maya, when I first met Atlas, I thought we were saving his life. I had no idea he was going to save so many others." As stars appeared over healing pastures, Maya captured one final photograph of the day: Atlas and Ranger touching noses in their familiar goodnight ritual, surrounded by a community of animals and humans who'd found healing through their example. The image would later grace the entrance to the Atlas Ranger Institute, the research facility being built to study and replicate their therapeutic protocols worldwide. But tonight, it was simply evidence of something extraordinary, proof that the most broken souls often possess the greatest capacity for healing others, that love shared multiplies infinitely, and that sometimes the most powerful therapy comes from those who've needed it most themselves. Atlas and Ranger had begun as abandoned animals facing death in a drought-scorched pasture. They'd become symbols of resilience, founders of a therapeutic revolution, and proof that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to transform their pain into purpose. Their story would continue through every animal they'd mentored, every human they'd helped heal, and every life touched by the sanctuary they'd built from the ashes of their own abandonment. Maya's camera had captured their journey from survival to service, from trauma to triumph, from broken souls to healers whose legacy would endure long after their individual stories ended. In a world often defined by cruelty and abandonment, Atlas and Ranger had proven that love, patience, and the determination to help others could create miracles that extended far beyond any individual life. They'd shown that healing was contagious, hope was renewable, and the most powerful response to betrayal was not revenge, but the creation of sanctuary for others who'd been similarly broken. Their story ended where it began, with Maya's camera, capturing the truth that some bonds transcend species, circumstance, and even death, creating legacies of healing that ripple outward like light, touching lives in ways that can never be fully measured but will never be forgotten.